5,000 Roman soldiers marched into the Scottish Highlands around 120 AD. None of them ever came home. Just think about that for a second. An entire legion. That's like a modern military division. Gone, vanished, no trace, no bodies, no survivors. These weren't raw recruits, they were trained Roman legionaries, wiped from history. But archaeologists have been finding clues, little pieces scattered across Europe, evidence that suggests this story is far more complex than anyone imagined. Fragments of a puzzle that spans continents and centuries, slowly revealing that the fate of Rome's lost legion might not be what we think. This is their story. The Ninth Legion Hispana earned their reputation through blood and survival. They fought alongside Caesar when he conquered Gaul. They learned their trade in the brutal Spanish campaigns that gave them their nickname, Hispana. Every honor they had was paid for in Roman blood. So when Emperor Claudius decided to invade Britain in 43 AD, the Ninth hit those beaches, wading through freezing surf while Celtic warriors screamed at them from the cliffs. But Britain was different. The tribes here were fiercer, more united in their hatred of Rome. The Britons had been watching what happened everywhere else. Gaul, Spain, Germania. They'd studied Roman tactics. They knew Roman weaknesses. And they were ready. Nothing could have prepared the Ninth for what came next, when Queen Boudicca's revolt exploded across southern Britain like wildfire in 61 AD. When the revolt erupted, Commander Petilius Cerialis grabbed what forces he could and raced south to help. The exact size of his relief force isn't recorded, but it likely included both infantry and cavalry from the Ninth Legion's garrison. What happened next was a disaster that nearly destroyed Rome's most experienced British legion. The Britons were waiting. They'd learned to fight Romans by watching Romans fight. They knew about Roman discipline, Roman formations, Roman tactics. So they turned all of that against them. Somewhere on the road south, Boudicca's warriors hit Cerialis and his men like a hammer blow. Tacitus records the result in stark terms. The Britons routed the legion and slaughtered the infantry to a man. Only Cerialis and his cavalry managed to escape, racing back to their fortress with the screams of dying legionaries echoing behind them. It was a catastrophe. The Ninth Legion's infantry had been virtually wiped out. But here's the thing about Roman legions. They were built to survive disasters like this. Most legions would have been finished after something like that, but not the Ninth. It just made them harder. They rebuilt, they recruited, they trained new soldiers to replace the dead, and they got back to work. Around 71 AD, the rebuilt Ninth moved north to York. For the next 37 years, they turned that fortress into the most important Roman base in northern Britain. York was the edge of civilization. Beyond it lay the Pictish Highlands, where painted warriors appeared from highland mists like ghosts, struck like lightning, then vanished back into the mountains. The Picts were different from other Celtic tribes. They didn't just fight Romans, they studied them. They learned Roman patrol patterns, Roman supply routes, Roman weaknesses. Then they exploited every single one. They'd hit a supply convoy, massacre the guards, steal the weapons, and disappear before reinforcements arrived. They turned themselves into living nightmares for Roman soldiers. But the Ninth adapted. They learned to fight a different kind of war, patrol warfare, ambush and counter-ambush. They built watchtowers and signal fires. They trained local auxiliaries. They turned York into an unbreachable fortress that could project Roman power deep into hostile territory. By 108 AD, they were still there, still fighting, still holding the line. We know this because they left us a stone inscription, carved that year, marking some construction project at their fortress. It's the last certain trace we have of the Ninth Legion Hispana. After 108 AD, they vanish from the historical record. Speaking of those Pictish warriors who gave the Romans such trouble, I've spent years researching their incredible story for my book The Painted People. It dives deep into who the Picts really were, how they lived, and the ingenious tactics they used to defend themselves against both Roman legions and Viking raiders. There's even a groundbreaking DNA study that reveals surprising truths about their origins. If you're watching this channel, you get 65% off the book, and I've also created something pretty special. An authentic Pictish recipe book based on real archaeological evidence from Pictish sites. It's only available as an add-on during checkout. Look, I'll be honest with you. Buying the book is really the best way to support this channel. Every purchase helps me do the kind of thorough research that goes into videos like this one. I'm incredibly grateful for any support that helps me keep bringing you these stories from history. The link's in the description if you're interested. Here's where things get weird. Roman legions put their names on everything: inscriptions, tombstones, building projects, milestone markers. From 108 to 162 AD, archaeologists have found hundreds of inscriptions from other Roman legions across Britain. But from the 9th, nothing. Complete silence. By 197 AD, two separate sources confirm they're not on the active duty roster. The Ninth Legion Hispana, one of Rome's most experienced fighting units, had simply ceased to exist. But when? How? Why? The timing gives us a clue. In 122 AD, Emperor Hadrian arrived in Britain with the 6th Legion. His biographer wrote that the Britons could not be held under control. Hadrian took one look at the situation and decided to build a wall, 73 miles of stone and steel, cutting Britain in half. The message was clear. Rome was done trying to conquer Scotland. But what happened to the 9th? Hadrian brought the 6th Legion to York, the 9th's old base. Did he bring them as reinforcements or as replacements? The archaeological evidence suggests something had gone very, very wrong on the northern frontier. The archaeological evidence from Britain tells a story of disaster. Around 105 AD, frontier forts across northern Britain show signs of sudden abandonment or destruction. Newstead, a key fortress on the Scottish border, was sacked and burned. Archaeological layers show hasty evacuations, scattered equipment, signs of violence. Something big had happened in Britain, big enough that Rome sent 3,000 reinforcements to York, big enough that they started planning Hadrian's Wall, big enough that they eventually gave up on conquering Scotland entirely. The British archaeological record paints a clear picture of crisis on the northern frontier. But what if the real story of the 9th Legion's fate lies somewhere else entirely? Of course, we can only imagine how it might have happened. Picture the 9th, cut down to half strength by years of frontier warfare, marching north into the Highlands around 117 AD. Maybe they were responding to reports of a massive Pictish uprising. Maybe they were trying to establish a new forward base. If the Scottish theory is true, it might have unfolded something like this. Highland war horns echoing off the rocks, Celtic spears punching through gaps in armour, Roman formations breaking apart in the narrow valleys where their cavalry couldn't maneuver, the disciplined ranks that had conquered half the world, scattered and overwhelmed by warriors who knew every stone, every stream, every hiding place in those ancient mountains. It could have been a running battle that lasted days. Roman survivors falling back, fighting desperate rearguard actions, watching their comrades die one by one in the swirling mists of Caledonia. Until finally, in some nameless valley, the last eagle fell and the 9th Legion Hispana ceased to exist. This theory fits the timeline. It explains Hadrian's Wall. It explains why Rome never tried to conquer Scotland again. The 9th had been Rome's best British legion, and if the Highlands could destroy them, then the Highlands were unconquerable. But recent archaeological discoveries suggest a completely different story. But then, archaeologists found something that changes everything. Back in the 1980s, they discovered small bronze tiles in the Netherlands. Nothing fancy, just administrative markers. But when they looked closer, they saw inscriptions etched into the metal. Inscriptions that bore the mark of the 9th Legion. These tiles dated back to the 80s AD, evidence of the Legion's earlier service on the Rhine frontier at Nijmegen, decades before their mysterious disappearance. Nijmegen was a massive Roman fortress, a major staging ground for Eastern campaigns. And suddenly, a completely different possibility emerges. What if the 9th hadn't died in Scotland at all? What if they'd been quietly transferred east to face an even more terrible fate? Here's something that should make us think twice. Two Roman legions disappear from the records around the same time, the Ninth Hispana and the 22nd Deotariana. Both vanish between 120 and 135 AD. Both were experienced battle-hardened units, and both disappear just as the most brutal Jewish revolt in history explodes across the eastern provinces. Imagine this alternative. The Ninth Legion pulled from Britain around 120 AD, marching east toward Judea. Maybe they thought they were heading to routine garrison duty. Maybe they'd heard rumors about unrest, but nothing they couldn't handle. They'd fought Celts and Germans and Dacians. How dangerous could Jewish rebels be? They were about to find out. In 132 AD, a Jewish leader named Simon Bar Kokhba launched a revolt that would make Boudicca's uprising look like a border skirmish. This wasn't just another tribal rebellion, this was total war. Bar Kokhba had been planning for years. He'd stockpiled weapons, trained fighters, built underground fortresses. When he struck everywhere at once. Roman garrisons across Judea woke up to find themselves surrounded. Jewish fighters emerged from hidden tunnels, attacking from directions the Romans never expected. Fortresses that had stood for decades were suddenly cut off, besieged, overwhelmed. The legions, perhaps scattered across multiple bases, fought desperate battles against an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere. Cassius Dio records the final toll: 580,000 Jews killed, plus countless Romans, 50 fortresses destroyed, nearly 1,000 villages wiped out. It took Rome 3 years and their best generals to crush the revolt. When it was over, Judea was a wasteland, and 2 entire legions had vanished from history. So what really happened to the Ninth Legion Hispana? The honest answer is, we don't know. Maybe they died in the Scottish Highlands, overwhelmed by Pictish warriors in some forgotten valley. Maybe they died in the deserts of Judea, ground down by 3 years of brutal warfare against Bar Kokhba's rebels. Maybe they were transferred somewhere else entirely, to fight in some other corner of the empire where the records have been lost. Most of Roman history is lost. We have fragments, pieces, clues scattered across 2,000 years. But sometimes those fragments tell us something important about the people who came before us. The Ninth Legion Hispana served Rome for over a century. They fought in Spain and Gaul and Britain, and probably half a dozen other places we'll never know about. They survived disasters that would have broken lesser units. They adapted to new enemies, new tactics, new kinds of warfare. They held the line at the edge of the world for 37 years, and then they walked off that edge and disappeared forever. But here's the thing, their story isn't really about how they died. It's about how they lived. These soldiers spent their lives fighting for something bigger than themselves. They built roads and fortresses and walls that lasted centuries. Who brought Roman law and Roman engineering and Roman civilization to the farthest corners of the known world? The Ninth Legion is gone, but the world they helped build, our world, is still here. And perhaps that's the only monument they ever really needed. Modern archaeology keeps finding new pieces of the puzzle, new inscriptions, new artifacts, new clues about what really happened to Rome's lost legion. Someday we might know for sure. We might find their final battlefield, their last fortress, their forgotten graves. Or perhaps the mystery is the point. Some stories are more powerful when they don't have endings. The Ninth Legion Hispana marched into history and became legend. These soldiers remind us that even the mightiest empires are built by ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And sometimes those people just vanish into the mist, leaving only questions behind. If you enjoyed diving into this mystery with me, I'd be honored if you'd consider supporting the channel by checking out The Painted People, my thoroughly researched book about the Picts. You'll get 65% off as a viewer, plus during checkout, you can add that exclusive authentic Pictish recipe book I mentioned. Every purchase really helps me spend the time needed to research these incredible stories properly. Thank you for watching and for helping keep these forgotten chapters of history alive. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe. I have many more deep dives into fascinating historical mysteries coming soon. Let me know your own thoughts on these theories in the comments below.